Market Journal, television for agricultural business decisions, is a presentation of the University of Nebraska-Lincoln's Institute of Agriculture and Natural Resources. Promotional support is provided by the Nebraska Farmer Magazine. Partial funding provided by the Nebraska Soybean Board.
Well, thanks so much for joining us for another episode of Market Journal. I'm Bryce Duskin. We're coming to you today from the Nebraska AG Expo at the Lancaster Event Center in Lincoln. Now in its 16th year, the show has grown to become the second largest indoor farm show in the U.S. New this year and behind us today is the Innovation Hub. Their show attendees saw the latest cutting-edge technology. From autonomous equipment, robots, and more, these companies had the opportunity to showcase the latest tools that could transform the agriculture industry as we knew it. Coming up on today's broadcast, we'll catch up on the markets and get a look at the weather. But first, state and federal leaders continue to search for new ways to mitigate rising global temperatures. Much of that discussion has been focused on carbon. Over the past 2 years, carbon markets have emerged, giving ag producers who implement certain management practices the ability to profit. However, there is still a lot to learn about the newly emerging carbon market industry. In order to help make sense of this new frontier, the University of Nebraska-Lincoln's Institute of Agriculture and Natural Resources recently hosted the Carbon Agriculture Summit. The day-long event was held on UNL's East Campus in the Union and the Great Plains Room and continued to build on the conversations that took place during last year's Soil Health Summit. The event blended presentations on the elements and functions of healthy soils with participant discussions on conservation strategies and best producer practices.
Yeah, so last year's conversation was around soil health. We were coming out of a legislative session where there was a soil health task force. So there was a lot of interest in that, and then with the change in administration in DC, that pivoted over to carbon and carbon markets. And so this year's conversation is really about demystifying carbon, understanding all the different forms carbon takes, really understanding the cycling of carbon, both in cropping systems, but in livestock systems, everything from the ranch to the feedlot, and everything in between. So,
while the summit helped attendees learn about the various forms of carbon, this particular event was intended to understand the intricacies of carbon markets and what that could potentially mean for producers in Nebraska.
We could spend a lot of time talking about carbon, and some of the speakers today are talking about the different versions of carbon. But what we're really dialing in is kind of the living carbon, if you will. So everything from the plants and the animals. 20% of our body is made up of carbon, if you will. Plants have a lot of carbon. The carbon sometimes is in the form of simple sugars, sometimes it's in more complicated carbohydrates like cellulose, or when corn stalk resists lodging, it stands up for combining, that's lignocellulose. But as those plants grow and then they die, they release that carbon to the fauna, so earthworms and insects that break that down, eat it, move it around, and then the microbes, the fungi, the bacteria, they break it down into the essential basic building blocks. And some of that, as they're chewing up the organic matter, if you will, is released back into the atmosphere as carbon dioxide, which then cycles through the atmosphere, taken back up by plants, fixed back into these carbohydrates, the cellulose, back into the soil, and we have this virtuous cycle. And today is really trying to bring people together for a discussion around carbon in all of its forms. And yes, at the end of the day, understanding the complexities of carbon in markets and what that means for our producers is part of that.
Homer Buell of the Shovel Dot Ranch was one of the panelists. For nearly 130 years, the Buell family has been doing business in the Nebraska Sandhills, all while caring for the land, water, and wildlife. The Buells continue the family commitment to conservation today. However, as Homer puts it, when it comes to conservation efforts, it might take a bit of a mind shift to put your focus in the right place.
When I got out of college and I took over, we had a seed stock herd, Herefords, and I was much more in tune to what I tell people, looking out. I didn't look down. I was always looking at the cattle, evaluating the cattle, seeing whether we were getting things right done in that way. And that was good in a lot of ways. But I wasn't looking down enough and seeing what's down there in the soil and the plants. And I think it was just a mind shift that I had, that I really came to understand that on our ranch, the biggest resource that we manage is the grass and the whole water cycle and all that. So an understanding of that really changed my mindset and how I looked at managing the ranch and what was most important.
Now, if you weren't able to attend this conference, but you'd like to see what you missed, event organizers have posted the entire Carbon Credit Summit online for you to watch at your convenience. We've posted a link to the summit videos along with this story. You can find them on the Market Journal website. While we're on the topic of carbon credits and carbon sequestration, we recently had the opportunity to sit down with a Bayer agronomist. Tyler Williams tells us that U.S. conservation efforts from ag producers can be beneficial not only for the pocketbook, but also for the planet. We're going to talk about agriculture and sustainability now with Tyler Williams. He's an agronomist with Bayer. Tyler, we appreciate the time today.
Hey, thanks, Bryce.
There's been a big push to talk about and recognize the sustainability efforts that are already underway within agriculture and adopt some of those new practices. What can you share with our viewers about where things are at right now?
Yeah, so I think the unique thing, right, is there's a lot of stuff going on. There's a lot of buzz. There's a lot of things that you hear in the news, but I think there's also a lot of opportunity. One of the things that I've worked with a long time is sustainable ag. All that area can really be an opportunity for growers to not only adopt the practices, but also bring in some revenue from other things that are out there in this space. And so as an agronomist, one of the things that we focus on is the soil. If even without all of the outside opportunities, the benefits that no-till, cover crops, reduced tillage in general can do for your farm and your soil sort of outweigh, in my mind, all the other maybe revenue opportunities that might be coming at growers. So it's really about the practices. It's first, right? And then it's, all right, what sort of opportunities exist out there that might help them, whether it's revenue or resources. That's really what's I think kind of going on.
I think that area has been described as like the Wild West of agriculture right now, of trying to figure out what that looks like. I think Bayer's been working to kind of simplify that. Tell us what work's going on.
Yeah,
right now.
So the Wild West is it's probably a pretty good term, right? It's new, right? It's kind of this new space, and where does agriculture fit, right? Agriculture sort of fits as like the solution in a lot of cases, right? And so what Bayer's done in 2020, we started the Bayer Carbon Program, kind of as a pilot project, and really looking at the carbon credits, right? Can we do a practice change, create an offset credit that can then be sold on the market? That's kind of where a lot of this has been going. And then in 2021, we expanded it, and then 2022, and then into 2023, we're also expanding that Bayer Carbon Program. And really what that is a grower comes in, they want to change a practice, they want to add cover crops, they want to switch to no-till or strip till. We'll pay them per acre for that practice. So growers like that because then they kind of know how much money they're getting. It's not based on how much carbon they sequester. It's kind of like, all right, I know if I've switched to cover crops, I can get this amount of money to kind of go to offset some of those costs of making that transition, because we know it does cost. But just a few months ago, we launched Foreground. That's sort of a broader platform, right? A broader place where growers can kind of come in and pick and choose things that they want to be involved in based off where they're at in their operation. One of the challenges with carbon credits is you need to make a practice change. Well, what if the growers, and we know a lot of them, have been doing this for a long time? It's like the 80s Farm Bill. A lot of people switched to no-till. So they've been doing that for a long time. But there are opportunities for growers that have been doing this for 20, 30 years out there that might not be eligible for carbon credits. So that's really what Foreground is about, is to kind of give them the whole big picture of resources, but also the different revenue streams that are out there that they can pick and choose what they want to do.
Let me ask you this. It's something I've heard from producers talking to them about this area. Someone's offering to pay you to implement some sort of practice here, but they want to know, where does that money go, or who's interested ultimately in providing those funds to make that switch at the producer level?
Yeah, and so there's probably lots of different places where the funds can come from, right? From like the carbon credits place, there's like certain registries that will buy the credits and they'll sell it to companies that want to offset their emissions. So a lot of companies out there will say, all right, we want to reduce our emissions by 50%. But through their own operations, there's only so much you can do, right? So a lot of times there's only so much you can reduce. You still need to produce some sort of emissions to create a product. So then if you can create a change your money can sort of create the change from a certain practice that then sequesters carbon, pulls it out of the atmosphere. The idea is that that's adding value to them, right? So again, we've been talking about sequestering carbon for a long time with farmers because it adds value to the soil, but also it can add value to their pocketbook a little bit too, just for some of those opportunities. So it comes from a lot of places. Kind of depends on what kind of goals and companies and what they want to do with their long-term footprint.
Who can participate in the Bayer program?
So that's a great thing about Bayer Foreground is it's for anyone, and whether you want to do no-till in 20 years or you've been doing it for 20 years, there's opportunities in there to get resources, discounts. You see what revenue streams might be available. So it's really open to anyone. That's the value, as opposed to the carbon credits is sort of that narrow place. So BayerForeground.com, anyone can go in there, sign up. It's free. Take a look at it, see if there's anything you like.
All right, Tyler, we appreciate the information. That is Tyler Williams, an agronomist with Bayer. To learn more about the rewards and how Bayer Global could fit into the conversation, you can visit them online at Bayer.com. As always, we posted a link for more information on the Market Journal website. Well, it is time now to check in on the latest when it comes to the grain markets. On Thursday morning, we had the chance to sit down with Jeff Peterson. He is the president of Heartland Farm Partners. Joining us here at the Nebraska Ag Expo is Jeff Peterson, the president of Heartland Farm Partners. Jeff, great to have you on the show this wew.
Oh, it's always fun to be on the show, and especially when we're sitting out here at the Nebraska Ag Expo. It's been a great show.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, it's been a tale of two commodities, Jeff, as we look at corn and soybeans for the month of December thus far. Soybeans higher, corn lower. Let's start with the soybean complex. What is leading prices higher so far?
If we go back, I want to talk about what kind of pulled us back a little bit. When the RFS numbers came out and the RVO numbers came out, all of a sudden it kind of surprised the trade. And I don't know why it surprised the trade. They were looking for bigger numbers on the renewable diesel side, and all of a sudden bean oil started selling off, and that put a lot of pressure on beans, get middle of last week. But we have found some support. And I think there's two areas we found support. I think the weather overall in South America is just getting a little bit drier and a little bit hotter, and that kind of describe Argentina. Now there's a few areas in Brazil also that is kind of the similar way. They're a little bit dry, maybe in parts of Mato Grosso, a little bit also in Paraná and also in the very southern part of Brazil. So as a result of that, I think everybody's saying, maybe we need to pay a little more attention to the South American weather. And then we have seen some really good strength come out of soybean meal. So that's helped the crush margins. But overall, though, crush margins are just really good.
Jeff, remind us in South America where they're at with their growing season here as we're in the month of December.
Well, it's really all spread out. So let's start off first in Brazil. So here's what's going to be crazy, Bryce, is that here in probably about another week in parts of Mato Grosso, you're going to hear them talking about some of their first harvesting of soybeans. And so you got to figure, though, they'll harvest getting started here in December, but more of it will happen January, February, March. So in your very southern areas of Brazil, you're in a critical time frame in there in regard to filling those pods. Now you move on down to Argentina, they have a wide planting range in there, and honestly not everything's even planted yet there. So we've got a big range of what's going on agronomy wise down there right now.
All right, let's switch. That was the soybean side of things. Corn has not found the support for the month of December, it seems like. Why is that?
Well, I've got a number of headwinds right there. If you think over and you look at crude oil came down yesterday, put down kind of a new low for the move, down mid-71s. You'd have to almost go back a year since we were that low. And since we're so tied between corn going to ethanol end up being blended in the fuel supply. So, that's given us a really strong headwind. In addition to that, just the overall demand out there on the miles driven, on the gasoline side, the implied gasoline demand would say we're down about 6 or 7% from a year ago. We also have not seen exports come back around yet. Now, that's not surprising. Saw some big, last in the summer, ended up having a big safrinha corn crop. As a result, they still got bushels. They're still cheaper than we are, but there's a little bit of light at the end of the tunnel. It looks like as we get out into January, into February, we start getting more competitive, and at that point, we should start seeing our exports start to pick up some on that, Bryce.
So those are the storylines for corn and soybeans as we've established these first few days of December. Where do we go from here as we continue through the rest of the month? What's next, do you think?
Well, it's a really critical time. And the reason I say it's a critical time in there is in order to drive this market higher from here, we ultimately are going to have to see some drier conditions actually happening and continuing to happen coming out of South America. If we do not see that happen, and all of a sudden we'd start seeing range in Argentina, and Brazil would stay about as they are, then we're going to have to, and we'd pull these markets back from here because it's too early to trade the dry situation we have in U.S. weather. I'm not saying that isn't going to matter at some time down the road because it is very important and areas are very dry, but it is going to take more time, and we probably got to get out into March, into April before that actually comes into play.
Well, it's always fun, as you mentioned, being here at the Nebraska Ag Expo. A lot of people walking by, asking you your thoughts on where we're going, as you just shared with us. Talk about some of the other conversations, though. The producers asking you, what kind of questions are they asking you? What kind of conversations are you having?
Well, here's what we kind of find, and this is where I'm finding this run-up we've had in prices is a little bit different than it would have been, say, back in 10, 11, 12. 10, 11, 12, there was kind of almost a complacency of the market's not going to roll over, not too bad. What we generally see here is the underlying concern about when is this market going to roll over, because actually the break-even prices are so high. And so a lot of people are concerned, even though they're concerned about what they're going to grow for a crop because it is so dry, everybody is very concerned about what the profitability. And we hear a lot of people asking, Bryce, do I need to think about selling at some point, not just, the 22 remaining bushels, but also 23, and do I need to look at 24 and 25 also?
Well, on that, about a minute left here, Jeff, to get your thoughts on where we're going from here. What kind of advice you're giving to producers? How can they, or I guess what suggestions are you making to producers, if any, about locking in future years worth of crops?
Yeah, I would say on basically what we're going to need to do on this move in here, if we don't get a move higher in the next 2 to 3 weeks, then we're going to have to make some additional sales, or even if the move is very good, make some additional sales, work on cleaning up some of the old crop, working on getting stuff on the new crop. But what you want to do is you want to build into your marketing plan flexibility, because sometime down the road, if this would be a year, and we're due for a year where it's even hotter and drier than what we experienced, then you have to have the ability to still get a better price on those bushels that you physically have already sold. So build that flexibility into your plan.
Final word is yours. What else is happening you want to mention on this week's broadcast?
I would say right now, just think about your break-evens, where you're at. Do some careful planning upon when do you need to move bushels to make sure that you've got cash flow needs covered. Watch your basis levels very good. We've had a little bit of a pullback in basis, but I think we can get a little bit of a surge again as we get past the first of the year, and for sure as you get out into that April, May time frame. So start dusting off the dust on that marketing plan and get it all put together, Bryce.
Thanks, as always, to Jeff for his time this week. Now, coming up next week, we'll be joined by Heather Ramsey from the ARC Group. If you have a question you'd like for me to ask Heather, feel free to email us or get in touch on social media, and I'll be sure to pass your questions along. Well, Carson Ryman loves his potatoes, not only eating them, but also growing them. The Gothenburg High School freshman has turned what started in the family's garden to an established business. He's doing that in this corner of a center pivot. Moving his enterprise from the garden to a larger space brought its share of challenges, but Ryman is learning about raising potatoes for market on his half-acre plot. If this story sounds familiar, it's because we featured him a few months ago right here on Market Journal. In the December issue of the Nebraska Farmer, you can read a more in-depth write-up about his experience. Well, it is time now for weather with Nebraska Extension Ag Climatologist and Market Journal Chief Meteorologist Al Dutcher. Al, as the month of December rolls on, how are things shaping up for the week ahead?
Well, Bryce, we had a fairly benign week up through the midweek period, and then of course we had the storm system moved across the state on Thursday, brought some freezing drizzle, some lighter snow to northern Nebraska. Just kind of a nuisance type of an event. We did get some moisture out of it, but nothing in the significant nature, just a little travel headaches with the freezing drizzle. More importantly, we are now set up for a fairly significant storm system next week, and we're going to get into that in a second. And it looks like a trend that looks to be pretty well established across the western United States, that we're going to go through a fairly distinct period here over the next few weeks of multiple storm systems moving through the southern United States and ejecting out the Central Plains. So we'll have to pay attention to see whether or not they finally get a good semblance of moisture across the state. And it does appear that the Tuesday storm that we're talking about is going to give us a pretty good dose across most of the state. So if we look at the upper air models, we do have a little quick moving shortwave moving across the northern plains, a little bit of a southern jet to our south. These will merge just to the east of Nebraska. So that's where the vast majority of precipitation will be. We might see a little light precipitation in northeast Nebraska, but nothing in the significant nature. Now, as we go into tomorrow, we're basically going to be looking at regions starting to build into the region and ahead of this big trough coming in the western United States. So we're going to see our temperatures lift up into the lower 40s across the north, and probably the lower to mid 40s across the south. Wouldn't be surprised if we touch the upper 40s in southwest Nebraska. Now as we get into the day on Monday, the ridge starts to build up a little bit farther to the north, so it's going to bring that warmer air well up into portions of northeastern Nebraska. So we'll be looking at low 50s in the southwest, upper 40s in the southeast, probably the lower to mid 40s across the northeast. Maybe starting to see some cooling temperatures in the northwest where we start to get some more cloud cover with this system. And then we start to see it progressing into the southern Rocky Mountains. That's going to bring a big fetch of moisture up from the south. We'll start to see precipitation breaking out in the form of snow across western Nebraska. And more importantly, we're probably going to start to see some thunderstorm and moderate rainfall developing across eastern Nebraska. As we get into the midweek period, that low sits right over top of us. And that's going to bring a big fetch of moisture all the way around this system. Probably looking at some significant snowfall right now, according to the models, in eastern portions of South Dakota, northern Nebraska, and of course the Panhandle. And then depending on how fast the system moves will depend on how long the snow event itself lasts. Because by the time we get to Thursday, we see the system slowly sliding into southwestern Nebraska. So we're still going to have a big wraparound effect with this system, but because it's spreading out, we won't see as much significant precipitation, but we will still start to see some accumulating snowfall, particularly across western Nebraska. By the time we get into the late next week, we'll start to see the system moving up toward the Great Lakes, and behind it is another trough that we'll have to be dealing with. So precipitations may increase as we get into late next week. And further out, 8 to 14 day forecast next Thursday. The following Tuesday keeps that cold in place. And in terms of precipitation, another shot of moisture for our region.
Thank you very much, Al. Finally today, it is time to share with you another edition of Crop Talk. This week we sat down with Nebraska Extension Educator Laura Thompson to discuss the many ways that UNL's on-farm research can assist producers with finding innovative ways to increase yield and profitability. Today on Crop Talk, we are joined by Laura Thompson. She's an Extension Educator and she's the Director of the Nebraska On-Farm Research Network. Laura, it's great to have you here on Market Journal. Thanks for joining us.
Yeah, it's great to be here.
Talk to us about the Nebraska On-Farm Research Network. What is it?
Yeah, so in Nebraska, we're really privileged to be able to have this network for over 30 years now. And the mission is really to allow producers and crop consultants and industry and the university and our commodity organizations to come together and conduct research on farmers' fields that is relevant to their operation and is locally applicable. And so farmers are very involved in the entire research process, determining research questions that are important for their operation, looking at things that are going to impact their farm's productivity, their profitability, and really thinking about what's going to make a difference in the long-term sustainability of their operation. So we're really involved in helping producers set up those trials, carry them out on their farms using the equipment and the technology they have, helping them set them up in a robust way so that they can get reliable information, and then helping them analyze and interpret it and do some of that data crunching so that they can get meaningful information out of it at the end.
Well, I'm sure as 2022, the end of it nears, you've been busy compiling reports and looking back on some of the projects in 2022. If you don't mind, share with our viewers today an example or two of some of the research that took place.
Yeah, so it's always fun to get to see some of the results coming in right now. And there's a huge variety of research studies each year. So that's one thing that's really fun about the program is that farmers have so many interesting ideas that they want to try. So some that we've been looking at are soybean planting date, seeding rate, evaluating variable rate seeding for soybeans, looking at nitrogen management for corn, looking at fungicide applications, looking at row spacing studies, evaluating how to implement cover crops best in our operations, whether that be seeding rates, dates, interseeding, termination timing, all the aspects around managing that cover crop. As well as looking at some equipment studies, looking at some new technologies, looking at how maybe active downforce or some of those technologies might play out in operations.
There's an opportunity for producers to get involved with this. We'll talk about that here in a moment, but you mentioned kind of research within corn and soybeans. Are you open to all crops grown in Nebraska, or how do you kind of open this up to producers?
Yeah, so we are open to all crops. Most of the research is being done on corn, soybeans, dry edible beans, and wheat. So those are the primary areas that producers are working with. But we have had projects on other crops and welcome anyone to be involved.
What kind of results and feedback have you heard from producers that take part in this?
Yeah, so producers really enjoy getting to see what the research is showing on their own farms. It's very applicable, as well as seeing what their neighbors are doing and learning. Producers really feel that it's reliable and robust, and it impacts their management going forward. So that's very exciting and rewarding to see.
You are recruiting producers to join you in 2023 as part of the Nebraska On-Farm Research Network. If someone's interested, how do they go about that process in identifying a project that they want to be doing in the next year?
Yeah, well, this is a great time for them to be thinking about that. The past season is probably still a little bit fresh on the mind, and with harvest wrapped up, people probably know different things that maybe were interesting that they saw or kind of wondered, what if I had done this differently? And so those questions can be a great springboard into on-farm research studies for next year. So maybe they were wondering if that fungicide application really paid off or was really necessary. And so maybe that's something they want to try to evaluate through an on-farm research study next year. Or was did I optimize my nitrogen fertilizer application? And so we can help set up those trials. So I'd encourage, as people are moving into this planning season, fertilizer application and input purchasing, to kind of keep in mind what things they might want to evaluate and what's going to be important for their operation going down the road.
Laura, of course, if producers are curious, they could go do this on their own, but what's the benefit of them partnering with you all?
Yeah, well, our goal is really to help facilitate the program. We're going to help set up those trials in a way that's going to be robust and give confidence in the results, and really try to facilitate that, as well as help with a lot of that data crunching and the numbers. And so we'll be able to work with the technologies they have, whether that's a weigh wagon or yield monitor, to collect that data, as well as helping collect some other information during the season and help kind of monitor those studies throughout the year. So really trying to help bring confidence, help with that analysis and reporting, and bring those conclusions to the farmers.
The website for our viewers interested in learning more is onfarmresearch.unl.edu. Laura, I've also seen some of the studies and the data that you've compiled from years past. Is that also available on the website for producers to go see?
Yes, all the past research results. There are now over 1,000 studies that are available on our website, and you can view those as a PDF from each year's report book, or you can use our searchable database that's on there. And so you can search by the county that you live in and see what studies have been done in your area. You can also search by a topic. Maybe there's something specific you're wanting to learn about. And so that's a great way to get some information that's relevant to your area, and maybe get some ideas about what you want to look at in the future.
Our thanks to Laura for taking the time to sit down with us this week. If you'd like to learn more about how you can get involved with Nebraska's On-Farm Research Network, visit the link on the Market Journal website. Well, that is all the time we have for this week's show, coming to you from the Nebraska Ag Expo this week. For on-demand content that you might have missed, be sure you're subscribed to Market Journal on YouTube. We hope to see you back here next time. Until then, I'm Bryce Duskett, wishing you a safe and productive week.
Join Market Journal online at marketjournal.unl.edu. You can also follow us on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. Promotional support is provided by the Nebraska Farmer Magazine. Partial funding provided by the Nebraska Soybean Board. Market Journal is produced by the University of Nebraska-Lincoln's Institute of Agriculture and Natural Resources.